There we go. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sherilyn. I haven't met many of you, but I also work with the Forest Business Alliance team. Most of what I focus on is coordinating tribal resources. And then with the Forest Business Alliance, we also have Christopher. So Chris and I will be presenting, and then Regine Miller is here as well. Um, this presentation is just going to be a quick overview of the business and workforce development solicitation, just some key points that we want to touch on. So the first few slides we'll go through pretty quickly. And then we'll get into the application a little bit more. So yeah, so here we are. So we'll talk just about the grant types of workforce development or the business development, the eligible activities and preferred projects, then scoring, project readiness, environmental permitting, some common budget concerns or things just be aware of with the budgets, and then some of the additional things like greenhouse gas, other co-benefits, the priority of populations, those forms, and then lay out some potential next steps. And we are going to try to leave a lot of time for question and answer as well. So next slide.
Maybe, I'll just add, and then it'll start the next slide, but we'll go through the first part really quick, 1 through 3, or sorry, 1 and 2 rather, because that's all going to be in the CAL FIRE guidelines, and so we don't want to rehash all of that, but we did want to highlight a few things in there, and then we'll slow down a little bit for the rest of it and go into a little more detail. So, and we have quite a lot of focus on e-civis in this, so if there's time at the end, we can also get out of the here and into the actual portal if necessary. So, all right. So as you all know, because you're here, probably that there's two types of projects. There's the business and workforce development, and we were encouraging people to really think about when they're considering submitting a project, whether or not it's a good fit from the start. You should, there will be, under the business development type of project, things like solid wood and biomass processing and manufacturing, in-woods operation and tree nurseries, those are ones listed. And then under bioenergy types, there's the forest biomaterial power generation and biofuels. And then for the workforce development, again, that includes in-woods, transportation, and manufacturing. And there is a possibility still that you could apply for research and development grants, but they must be ancillary to forest-related businesses or forest-related workforce development. So it has to be very closely tied to that. Preferred projects. So they're listed there on the screen. I'm not going to read them out, but the wood products team has identified specific preferred projects that it sees as being strategic in advancing the forest sector. So proposals that incorporate these may receive additional consideration. So again, these are real specific, so we'll let you look at those in the guidelines. They're listed there, but just wanted to call your attention that they exist. Under the application scoring, those of you who've already been through the process before will know this changes periodically. It's the same as the last round, but it's different from 2 rounds ago. The business development application scoring and the workforce development application scoring, they're both on a 100-point scale. One I've highlighted, well, they're slightly different, right? The categories, they overlap. I think 5 out of the 6 or 7 categories overlap in their content. The names are a little different. One important one, which we're about to get into momentarily, is project readiness. You'll notice that is worth, for business development applications, that's worth 20 points, so 20% of your total. For workforce development applications, it's worth 25 points, so 25% of your total. There's also, I'll mention this later in the presentation, but priority populations, which is related to the co-benefit uh, material we're going to go over toward the end of the presentation. That's worth 10 points for both. That'll make more sense when we get further along in the presentation, but they're both they're all important sections, but those are the project readiness is one that people often have questions about, and it's highly worth a lot of points, so you need to pay attention to that. So we think about project readiness in two ways, or readiness rather. One, we're thinking about grant readiness. You should quickly run through this basic list of questions when you're thinking about whether or not you're ready to apply for a grant, any grant, right? These questions apply to any type of grant, including this CAL FIRE opportunity. Do you know, why your project is needed? Do you generally have a sense of what needs to be done, what sort of activities you need to do to implement the project? How long will it take to achieve what you're setting out to achieve? How much would it cost? Are you familiar with managing grants? What are the administrative requirement, contracting requirements, these sorts of things? All of those are questions that, again, if you do a lot of grants, you're probably already familiar with that, but try to think through that at the outset so that you're not caught off guard later on. And then more perhaps for those of you who are familiar with generally managing grants, the second part here is project readiness. And these are every grant program has very specific requirements, or not everyone, but a lot of them do. And CAL FIRE is no different. Some things you should consider for this CAL FIRE opportunity, and definitely highlight in your application, is site control. So when you're working with your team, developing your application, make it very clear how whether or not you have control over the site, whether it's through a deed, a lease, or some other written documentation. Knowing where your project will take place and in describing that in your application, having a relationship with the landowner, preferably one that you can demonstrate through letters of support or participation, is really important for CAL FIRE and determining your project's readiness. Another thing you'd want to think about is funding for cost share or match. Do you have the funding lined up? Do you have the cash, or do you have a line of credit worked out to meet the cost share contribution? We'll talk about cost share and match in more detail in a little bit, but knowing that as you're getting ready to prepare the application and talking about it in the application is really important. Another one that is the supply and offtake agreements. Can you get those and include them in your application? Even if it's, you have some evidence of that, which is really helpful in demonstrating to CAL FIRE that your project is ready and can be implemented successfully within the time frame allotted. Complementary funding, if you're not applying for all of the funds from CAL FIRE, what other funds are required, and demonstrating that those funds are available either through cost share, through an existing a grant from another entity, another funder, or other sources. And talking about, funding beyond the life of the program is also sometimes helpful. But in terms of readiness, making sure all your funding is lined up and describing that clearly. And then lastly, partners. There are other things, but these are the 5 things we're citing here. Do you have established relationships with your proposed partners? Partners are different than subcontractors in some cases. Sometimes there's some overlap. For example, if you're hiring an equipment operator or consultants to train your member of your team, those are most likely to be considered contractual support and not a partner. You would just include those in your proposal and in your budget, but you wouldn't need a letter of participation. However, if you're working with an entity that will be providing the land on which your training activities will take place for a workforce development project, then most likely the landowner would be considered a partner, and you would need a letter of participation from them. So in short, demonstrating that you're ready to implement and that it's feasible for you to do this within the time frame allotted is really important. And it's something that on page 7 of the grant guidelines, they're very clear about this. And they say that, preference may be given to projects that demonstrate operational readiness. Last thing on that is that it also applies to environmental compliance. So they actually cite on page 7 an example, right? That projects that can show compliance with CEQA or NEPA, if it's applicable, might prior to submitting the application, may be given preference. Over to you, Sherilyn.
So another kind of part of the readiness in the project as a whole would also be the environmental documentation. So CAL FIRE wants to see projects, or will give priority potentially to projects that do have their environmental documentation in place. And this can be a little bit confusing. So I'll also say, Chris, Virginia, and I saw Vance join as well. Feel free to jump in at any point of this. But if you have questions about your projects, and if it needs any environmental documentation, then we've included the CEQA, the CAL FIRE CEQA contact on this page. You'll need environmental compliance in place for any ground disturbing activities. So even if there is a workforce development, then you would also, if there's potentially ground disturbing activities as a part of that workforce development, need environmental compliance. I saw your question, Michael. So CEQA is triggered because no matter what, you would need to have a conversation with CAL FIRE about this, because the funds are coming through the state. So that funding stores trigger CEQA. And then NEPA requirements depend on where the project is. So if there's a federal nexus in there, then that would also trigger NEPA. And there are times if there's NEPA compliance in place already, then that can satisfy CEQA compliance. But
and that's so to ensure that the bark beetle that's endangered that California may have overlooked is not.
It could be for so many things. Okay. It all depends on the project for sure. So okay. Yeah. And that's a great point, that the environmental compliance, it covers a lot of different things, but it could cover certain species, it could cover cultural resources or historical resources or waterways. It can cover a whole bunch of noise, nesting birds, so many different things. And it can be a little complicated. So definitely recommend checking in with CAL FIRE for specific project specific questions about that. Did you have something to add? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, in addition to readiness, like it's a big consideration in readiness, as I already stated, but also, there is a time frame. Typically within 1 year of the grant execution, the grant agreement execution, you need to have all your CEQA ducks in a row. And it's listed in the guidelines as one of the reasons you could potentially lose funding. So it's hard to overstate the importance of this. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and if you need, this can help pay for that CEQA compliance as well. So getting an idea of the timeline and the costs to get that environmental compliance in place, if you don't have it, would be something to kind of get started on. So this is just a screenshot of, and we can put this link in the chat as well. We have it up on the Forest Business Alliance templates page, but this is CAL FIRE's, one of the sheets in their work plan document. And so here you can list out the environmental compliance documents that you already have. One thing to consider is if you have environmental compliance ready on one, for one project, but maybe not for another part of the project, then just to make that really clear in your proposal that you can get started on doing the work where there already is environmental compliance while you're getting the environmental compliance complete for another part of the project, if that's relevant to your project. So, but I'll put, after I'm done talking, I'll put the link in the chat to this one. Okay. And then here's this a SQL flowchart. We also have a more extensive SQL flowchart on the Forest Business Alliance page that I'll put in the chat as well. But this can kind of help at first glance determine if your project needs more extensive SQL review, and then who would be in charge of that. So who would be the lead agency, which would, depending on your project, potentially be the city, the county, could be CAL FIRE, or it could be a federal entity for NEPA.
It's really blurry. It's making me dizzy. I think I made it. All right.
Thanks for that note in the chat, Vance. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'll put the links to these in the chat, and then over to Chris.
Okay, thanks, Sherilyn. So there's lots of potential budget concerns, but I've listed 4 of them here. So the first one is prevailing wage requirement, which we talked about in the last peer learning network meeting a little bit, and we've talked about it at various times in the past. CAL FIRE makes no opinion about whether or not your project is subject to the prevailing wage requirement, but it also notes that all applicants are responsible for budgeting for prevailing wages when they're applicable. So, and just one more point on the applicability of it. Starting July 1st, certain fuel reduction work, such as residential, including, right, but not limited to residential chipping, rural road fuel breaks, and fire breaks, will be subject to prevailing wage. So if whether or not this applies to your project, it's hard to say. You can learn more about prevailing wages on the Department of Industrial Relations website, which we'll throw that URL in the chat as well. 3rd paragraph down in the notes, Sherilyn. If you know your project is going to have a prevailing wage applicable to it, you can go through the steps for determining what the wage is. There's a step-by-step process on that website that's on the screen right now, and which we'll send you the link for figuring this out. It's 6 steps for workers classified as journeymen, and for apprentices, it's established by county. So the process for determining it for apprentices is a little more challenging. It's pretty straightforward for the journeyman level. But if you have doubts about it, it's very difficult for us to say whether or not it applies to as FBA, and CAL FIRE also won't help us with this. So if you have any doubt about this, you really should contact the prevailing wage unit of the Department of Industrial Relations, and we have a phone number for them and an email address, which you can also find on that website, which we'll send you the URL for. But sure, Regina has a question. I think it's probably related to the timing.
Wanted to clarify. I think it's July 1st, 2026.
Yes, you're correct.
2025. So I'm just thinking in terms of your project timeline. As Chris mentioned, you'll want to account for prevailing wage if it will apply to your project. If your contracts are put into place after July 1st, 2026.
Yeah, and I think that applies to the fuels work after July 1st, 2026. But if you're doing something else where a prevailing wage would be, some other part of your project, just depends on the project, it could be enforced before then, right, Regine? That's the way I understood the latest guidelines, but.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. So my reading of it, because there's this new requirement for fuel reduction work, which goes into effect July 1st, 2026. But if you were doing some other type of project that would normally qualify as a public work, it could also apply there, but
Yes, that's true, Chris. That's accurate.
okay. Yeah, and this is kind of a confusing thing, but I encourage folks to go early to that website that we're going to send you the link for, the one that's on the screen, and check that out. And then we can try to help you, but it's really behooves you to get in touch with them if you have any doubts with the prevailing wage unit folks as soon as possible. Jeff's got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I went to the website and looked it over briefly. It doesn't get very explicit, so I sent them an email and didn't get any kind of response. Do you know, or have you had any experience with how to communicate with the Department of Industrial Relations to make a determination about the specifics of a particular project?
No, I've not spoken with them personally. Did you see the phone number? There's a phone number for them too. Did you try to call that number?
No, I didn't. So that
It's
should be
415. Yeah, we'll put that in the chat. There's a phone number for them as well, and then there's a specific email for the prevailing wage unit, which hopefully they would be more responsive. And if you want to talk afterwards too, like I did go through the whole process on their website. The challenge is knowing, if you're if you've got ongoing operations, you would already know, right? Like, I'm not saying you, Jeff, but just any project. But if it's a new project and you don't know exactly who you're going to hire yet, that's a little more challenging because you don't know the type of, it's by position, it's by worker type, right? So that's what makes it challenging. You really need to know the kinds of people you're going to be hiring to determine whether or not the prevailing wage applies, in addition to the type of project you're doing. So it's a little complicated. This might be worth a workshop of it in its own right, but
Yeah, when I get some time, I'll delve into it more. And
I'm happy to talk with you about it too, because I have spent some time on the website. So if you want to connect sometime, we can look at that together.
okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michael also added in the chat that if you leave a message, then they'll call you back in 24 hours.
Okay, great. That's good feedback. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
All right. Want to make sure we leave time for questions. So the matching, we're not going to go over this in a ton of detail because it's in the guidelines, right? But we wanted to highlight a couple of things here for the match requirements. One is that, it's in many cases, for example, people get concerned about meeting their match requirement, which is understandable. But for example, on this workforce development opportunities, specifically, there's no match required under 500K. And then over 500K, the match is quite reasonable. It's a little confusing because it says 1 to 9 if you look down under, So it's about 10 cents on the dollar, basically. So if you're applying for $1 million grant, you're required, I don't know the exact math, but it's roughly 10 cents on the dollar, right? It's not 9 to 1. If you're asking for $1 million, you're not required to provide, 9 million. It's the other way around. So we just wanted to highlight that. It's not as onerous as it seems, maybe. And then, business development still has some substantial match requirements, 1 to 1, and then 2 to 1 but again, here under between 500,000 and 2 million, it's 2 to 1 on the amount over 500,000. So we just wanted to highlight that because even though it's stated in the guidelines, people have questions about it. Also, thinking about your match, you can use other state and federal grants that you have that are related to what you're doing, as well as in-kind non-cash contributions such as volunteer time, employee time, goods and services. So the in-kind contributions include any non-financial contributions, so anything that's not cash, that are funded by another source and contribute to the achievement of your project deliverables. You need to spell these out in your application, but you often have more, I guess the main point here is you often have more in kind than you think. You need to sit down and brainstorm, what are the contributions that in kind contributions, the non-financial ones that are already in place that are going to be present to make the project possible. And people often have a lot more of that than they're aware of. So hopefully it won't be as difficult to come up with a match if you need to do it, if it's required for your type of project. Last point on match, anything you do, you have to do it within the proposal timeframe. So if you did it, beforehand or afterwards, it doesn't count. And it must be closely related to the project. So if you've got, like, for example, a bunch of volunteers and you're counting their time, whatever they're doing has to be directly related to your project in order to count that time. So, and then this is an eCivis screenshot. And so when you're going to eCivis, and I'm not sure how many folks have worked in eCivis, but in order to, if you did require match here, right? When you go to eCivis, you need to go to the budget settings, and there's a match cost share field down here at the bottom under budget settings, right after indirect costs. And that, you can either do it, a bunch of different ways. However you do it, you still have to justify it, and you need to justify it in your narrative, as well as putting the amount in the budget. So in this case, again, you could do it different ways. Itemizing it is, in my opinion, the easiest way to do it, but you could do it. There are other applicable ways, right? There are other ways you could do it. So just want to be clear, you need to choose this when you go to eCivis. You can't just leave it blank. Otherwise, it won't show up in your application.
Drayton asked a question in the chat if, Regina answered it, but if firewood donations to local tribes would be considered an eligible match. And then Regina, I don't know if you want to expand on your response anymore.
Yeah, I think I've seen applications that have used logs as match before, which was accepted. But that material was part of the larger match or larger cost share contribution. So you may think about incorporating other types of match in addition. So it's not just the firewood. And I would just say, generally speaking, cash match is the most competitive type of match, at least from CAL FIRE's perspective. So if you are able to provide cash match, that would be, and maybe in addition to the firewood donation, that might help to increase the competitiveness of your application.
What about using your own, like, existing staff and equipment and things like that as a match? Is that also considered competitive, or?
You could do that. That would be considered an in-kind match. You do have to be able to document clearly, what those matching contributions were in terms of like hours and rates for those particular staff members. And their work has to be focused on the project itself, not on other elements of your program. And I would say kind of similar, cash match is still king, but in kind, in terms of staff time, it can also be counted. And you could reasonably argue that it's necessary to make your overall program work and your grant successful.
And I would just add to that, if you're going to use your staff, like existing staff, your HR management system or your employee management system, right? Like, you need to, as Regine kind of alluded to, you need to make sure that their hours worked on this project are clearly attributed to this project, so that if there's audit requirements, if you have to be able to demonstrate really clearly, let's say that that you and I'm paid for by the project, and Sherilyn is the in-kind match. Her timesheet would need to show, let's say it's 20 hours a week or whatever that we're saying is the cost share. It would need to clearly demonstrate, right? And be able to be in our reports, we'd be able to, have to show that. And then this substantiated with that documentation with those timesheets. So it's really, that's why cash is easier, right? Because you don't have to, it's much easier to substantiate than these other things. It takes a lot more time to substantiate in-kind matches generally.
And CAL FIRE does generally require that grantees submit backup documentation for that match. So you would need to, in the scenario that Chris described, with Sherilyn's time being matched, the grantee would need to submit, say, for instance, Sherilyn's timesheet that really clearly lays out her activities that are being counted as match. You can also count other grants as match. You can leverage that. So if you have a grant from another agency or entity that's contributing to your program that is directly relevant to what you're proposing to CAL FIRE, those grant funds that are expended during the CAL FIRE grant term can also count as match.
So I'm a fuels management contractor. So I can use any existing equipment and all of our time on the projects, on our jobs to match, as long as I have, I support our timesheets, our I guess our invoices for the equipment that we pay for. Is that what you guys are getting at?
If it's directly tied to the deliverables for your project. So like if it can't be your overall business. So, let's say you've got whatever, it's hard to say to answer the question without knowing what you're proposing as your deliverables for the CAL FIRE project. But if it's related to that deliverable, then yes.
Awesome.
You could
Thank
count
you.
it. Yeah. But we can talk, and again, if we get more specifics on your project, if you want to give one of us a shout, we can look at that and help you to figure out if it's, if it is tied to it.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sorry, I'm going on here. So, all right. The second bullet point on my list of common budget concerns, I'm not actually sure that people raise this often enough, but they should, because, you have 4-year projects potentially with this opportunity, up to 4 years. And there's no way to account for inflation or wage increases in the way that it's in e-civis, right? So we created in our templates, we created a little tool that might help you offset some of the inflation risk over the period of your grant. And so this is a screenshot of this inflation calculator that we built. And in this example, it's up on the screen right now, diesel fuel in year 1, we're saying it's cost $5, just use a nice round number. You put the cost in here, and then you put the number of years your project is for over here, and it gives you an average cost for the project, right? Over here, which says $5.31. So that would be your average cost over the 4-year period. You could also choose to budget it at the 3-year cost, the year 3 cost, right? Just to make sure that you're accounting for the cost increases over the life of the project. So again, this is it's a little gray area in terms of how, you can't, your budget costs have to be reasonable as a general rule, right? So you can't dramatically inflate the cost, but you do need to account for inflation at the same time. So we're just putting this in here for your consideration as you go through our budget template. If you decide to use this, that's how you use it. But at any rate, even if you don't use it, make sure you're thinking about inflation and wage increases so that you're not caught in year 3 or 4 with a shortfall. All right. Indirect costs. So another common concern, just to be really clear, workforce development projects managed by nonprofit grantees are the only projects eligible for indirect charge, right? You can't, if you're a business, this doesn't apply to you. You can't charge indirect anyway. But if you happen to be a workforce development project managed by a nonprofit, then you could. And typically, the maximum allowable charge is 12% for those types of projects, unless CAL FIRE grants you an exemption. If you are wanting an exemption, you need to reach out to CAL FIRE sooner than later and discuss, for example, if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate. And if you know that term, it's because you probably have one. That's something that's with federal, if you get a lot of federal grants, you probably have a NICRA, or a negotiated indirect cost rate. If you have a NICRA, you could potentially use that NICRA, but in no case will they allow over 20%. So generally, it shouldn't exceed 12% for nonprofits, and it definitely cannot exceed 20%. And if you want anything over 12, you need to talk to CAL FIRE before you include it. If you're charging indirect, if you're a nonprofit workforce development project, if you're charging indirect, you cannot include equipment purchases in that calculation. We're going to look at it. I'll show you a little quickly how to do this in CAL FIRE or in eCivis, but you need to exclude equipment purchases, and I'll show you how to do that in 1 second. So just like with the match, this is a screenshot of the eCivis portal again. You'll see that I've got my indirect cost. It's actually behind here, but I put in 12%, and I'm using a negotiated rate, right? You could also use a de minimis rate or an itemized rate or not applicable. The easiest one to do is negotiated. Or if you're a business, not applicable. You would hit not applicable here. If you're a nonprofit, put negotiated and then write in whatever your percentage is, right? As I just described. So yeah, not applicable for businesses, and then negotiated rate for most nonprofits, but not all. So I'm not sure if that's clear, but if you are a nonprofit and you have questions about it, we can talk about it in more details. We don't use everyone else's time up. Sorry. I think I missed one. Did I miss one? No. Okay. Last but not least, this is our last big section of this. So in the eCivis portal, there's a number of, there's a whole section of the application that's dedicated to co-benefits and priority populations. And we're going to go through those here to show you what you need to be doing for those. There's a link also. We did a workshop, FBA sponsored a workshop last year about co-benefits. And that's worth watching, because co-benefits is not it's not something everyone's familiar with. So it's worth going ahead and watching that YouTube. It's on YouTube, that presentation. Sherilyn, if you could throw that in the chat when you get a second. It's in the notes there.
Edited.
And this is kind of new. So co-benefits are new as of 2024. I think they put a lot more emphasis on them. CAL FIRE has, because business and workforce development grants are funded in part through the California Climate Investments, which is like it's a statewide program that it uses cap and trade dollars to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and do other, positive things for the state. So that's why there's an increased focus on it. But anyway, when you do your application, you're going to have to complete a number of questionnaires and about co-benefits and priority populations. So the first one is this, and when you go to this section, it's the CARB California Climate. That's the section of the eCivis application. When you go to that section, the first thing you're going to see is this CARB California Climate Benefits questionnaire. This has 24 yes or no questions that you're going to have to answer. When you answer yes to a question in eCivis, so in this one, for example, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, let's say we say yes to it, you'll be asked to provide a little bit more information. So I answered, this is just a screenshot of an example I did. I answered yes to this question, and I wrote in here in my in the section that's the box that's for explanations. I put, forest biomass will be used to produce biogas. The process will capture methane that would be otherwise escaping from decomposing biomass. That's all I need to do at this stage of the application. And then again, there's 24 of these. I answered yes to the only ones that would fit on the screen, which were 3 of them. I answered yes to all and put a little bit of information in the boxes. In addition to, I would say, in addition to including this information in the questionnaire, throughout your narrative, wherever you can, I would highlight these benefits, right? The greenhouse gas and other co-benefits. There's a couple of tools. We can provide the links to those as well. You will not be, sorry, I'm going to back up. You will not be responsible for calculating greenhouse gas emissions, for example, or other co-benefits. CAL FIRE will do that for applications that are successful. So you don't have to do that part of it. The only thing you need to do is answer whether or not the co-benefit exists, yes or no, and then provide some justification in this questionnaire, and then in your narrative, wherever it's applicable, mention it there as well. So that's all you need to do. And then later, if it comes down to calculations, CAL FIRE will work with you on that. So I'm trying to get to the next slide. There we go. After the co-benefits questionnaire, you'll be asked to use the priority populations mapping tool. So all of this is in eCivis, but essentially you're going to click on this tool and it'll open up and you'll go through the steps there. There's just a couple of steps and it'll give you, and again, this is the example. I said, yes, we are in a priority population area, and the type of population that we're working with is a low-income community, and are we meeting a need? Yes. And then later in the application, actually just further down in the portal, you'll have to provide a justification for that. Going a little, I think it's not that big. They only allow, I think, 1,000 characters or something. So it's not a huge explanation, but you do have to explain how you're meeting that need of that priority population. The next one under the co-benefits questionnaires is this community engagement questionnaire. This will help you demonstrate that the public has been involved in the planning and design and the implementation in a way that fosters improved access and involvement, engagement, essentially, with the community. So there's a link in eCivis, and we can share it in the chat as well. It's about, I think it's like a 15-page document. The questionnaire itself is very short. I think there's, again, this top box here, table 1, is it's on page 4 of the document that we'll send to you, but there's maybe 10 questions there. So you answer these questions in table 1 to estimate the co-benefit, the community engagement co-benefit, and then so it's only 5 questions, but there's a bunch of sub-questions. So it's about 10 in the end. This will determine whether give you a score kind of low, medium, or high. And then you go to table 2 in the questionnaire, and this will help you quantify the quality and the equity orientation, I guess is the term they used, of the answers that you made in table 1. It's much clearer when you read it, and you can see it, and just there's quite a lot of direction in there. So after you do these, in the application, you just have to choose the level of engagement, and then you upload the questionnaire that you filled out. So, and that's all you're required to do here. In closing of this co-benefits discussion, I would just say that, as many co-benefits as you can provide, and if you are the degree you can work with priority populations, it's going to give you a leg up in the application process. So take your time with that and really try to illustrate as much as possible that you're providing, benefits, and that you're working with and not only working with or benefiting priority populations, but working them in a way that really allows them to engage fully. That's going to give your application a better score in the end. Over to you, Sherilyn.
I was just responding to a question in the chat, that the recording will be available after the workshop. And before jumping to this, I also wanted to call out another question that Michael had put in the chat. He had asked, please confirm when eligible costs are reimbursable. And thank you, Regine, for your response. So you can't bill against the grant until your agreement is fully in place. And so that's just another thing to consider for the project as a whole, for match, for anything like that, is the timeline for that, because it will definitely still be several months out before a grant agreement would be in place.
I
Go
would
ahead, Regine.
just briefly add, for this particular solicitation, the deadline's towards the end of April. You would typically expect to have a fully executed agreement with CAL FIRE if your grant's awarded in some time like July, maybe towards the end of July. So in terms of just budgeting and timelines, that's kind of generally what one might expect.
Thanks, Regine. So some next steps, where to go from here. So we would definitely recommend reviewing the grant guidelines with your project in mind, looking at those project priorities, the allowable costs. If you have a project concept idea, you could also, reach out to the Forest Business Alliance. We'll have some of that contact information on the last slide, but just to run project ideas by us, see how it fits into the priority projects and costs. A second next step would be to create an eCivis account and explore the site. It can be a little clunky, and as Chris showed, there's a lot of pop-up questions in there. So just to be aware of the time that it might take to put an application in through eCivis. So to create a checklist or use the FBA's template of what you would need to get together for your project. That's something that we could also talk through with you. And then Chris, thank you for putting some of the most time-consuming pieces of application here. So there's the application pieces in eCivis, but there's also several different documents that are required to upload, like the scope of work, and that would just take a little bit more time to think through, and the FBA has templates for that. We have a budget template as well to help figure out those costs and calculate for inflation and costs year over year, but that budget does also still need to be entered into eCivis, so that's not a document that can be completed and then uploaded, so making sure there's time for that. And then if there's any time sensitive requirements like the letters of support or the environmental compliance documents, or even getting quotes for, equipment or consulting or anything like that. So definitely reach out to CAL FIRE. They provide about a 30-minute consultation with you for your project. Thanks for the note in here also to expect 3 to 5 days to respond to that. So plan ahead for that. And then also recommend, having a list of questions just so you can get the most out of that call with them. And then again, the Forest Business Alliance is here just to work through any of these project components with you. And then give yourself a little bit of buffer time before submitting. Definitely plan to submit a couple days before, because things always happen. So the next slide. So just to overview again, the Forest Business Alliance can provide the technical assistance We also have the recordings of the workshops and then peer learning network sessions on the YouTube page that we had put in the chat. I can add the link to the YouTube page again and to our templates page again just before we close this workshop. But there's a lot of information and resources in there as well, just like creating a business plan, financial considerations, things like that. So on the right, we have just a screenshot of the templates page so you can see how many templates are available on the Forest Business Alliance website. And then we also have a guidebook that's linked on the Forest Business Alliance webpage. And that can just take you through some additional considerations like e-civis, CEQA compliance, and things like that. Last slide. And this is our contact information. So, Chris, Regine, would you like to add anything else?
I don't have anything specific to add, but would certainly encourage everyone to take advantage of the consultation with CAL FIRE. And if it's helpful to you to prep for that meeting with anyone from our team beforehand, we're certainly available to do that. And we can also make ourselves available afterwards to provide consultation or technical assistance on your application. So reach out to the Forest Business Alliance Gmail address, which Sherilyn had on that last slide, and I can pop it in the chat too. Looks like we still have a few minutes for questions.
And then Chris just added the guidebook link in there too.
I would say, just on the e-civis, Sherilyn mentioned that, but it's manageable, but you really need to allow time for it. So we just showed you a few of the screens that need to be filled out. So, and it changed a little bit since last time. So if you submitted an application last time around, there's been some significant changes to it. So just take your time and get in there. And also I would say develop your text in Word and then paste it in. That's just a best practice, right? If you're, these online portals, like, I would get the questions. I think don't we have the list of questions offline in Word for the application, Sherilyn?
That's a good question. I don't know if we have a complete, like updated list.
Okay,
right
I can't remember. We used to have one, but at any rate, you can go in and look at the application questions, develop your answer in Word, and then paste it in there, and then you can, you have a backup basically in case something goes wrong. And use us, right? Like reach out to us when you want to.
So I've got a question regarding CEQA stuff. Like I said earlier, I'm a fuels management contractor. All the projects that we work on, like all the jobs that we work on, they either have to go through CEQA or NEPA documents. Would I just reach out to the awarding agencies and get those documents for the contracts that we already have in place? Or how would that go?
It depends. What are you requesting funding for? If you can
So I'm just looking to get some funding to purchase additional equipment.
So the approach I would suggest taking is basically within the body of your scope of work, and then also in the spreadsheet where you describe your environmental compliance. You would just state that the purchase of equipment does not trigger CEQA, and we could help you flesh something out. But basically, the purchase of equipment with grant funds doesn't trigger CEQA because it's not defined as a project under CEQA. You could, in your narrative, describe how it will be deployed on, in the field on other projects that already have environmental clearance that was completed by the project proponents that you work for, but you don't have to provide the CEQA documents or evidence of the environmental compliance for those actual projects.
Awesome.
So
Thank
I'll
you.
add to that though. I did one last year for equipment, and Carrie did one the year before, and they both ended up being funded. And I used Carrie's recommendation, and what she had proposed as well is that if you can get the CEQA, just the basically like the numbers and that like a screenshot of the first page or something to show that the projects that you will be using this equipment on do have CEQA compliance, then all the better for your project. So like Regine said, like it isn't necessary, but if you can, then it might make your project a little stronger.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Other questions?
Oh, darn, I missed them.
So we can definitely wait out the, the next 5 minutes. And also we're here, and Regine, thanks for putting the email in the chat too. If anybody has any other questions or wants to set up like a one-on-one call.
I have a question for everyone on the call, just to get feedback. Are you all familiar with eCivis? Have most of you used it in the past? We were talking about doing an eCivis workshop. That's why I was wondering if I'm just curious to get a show of hands. Who knows eCivis? Who's used it?
So definitely info
Yes.
coming in the chat.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. Okay, it looks like of the people answered, 2 no's and 2 yeses.
Jeff, you're unmuted. Did you have anything to add or comment for eCivis or otherwise?
Yeah, well, I went through the whole process before. It's a little convoluted, but you study it closely and gradually figure it out.
All right, follow-up question. Would you attend an eCivis workshop if we did it? The people who are unfamiliar with it. Those are quick. All right. All right. Okay. All right. No promises just yet, but we've been talking about doing that. So.
I don't know who actually, Vance, I think, ends up posting links to YouTube. So the recording would probably be available in a couple of days, I imagine.
Yeah, I should be able to get it up tomorrow. I need to post the office hours we did last week as well, so I'll do that at the same time.
Any last comments?
Reach out if you guys have questions or you want technical assistance. We're here to help with that, and you'll want for as many applications to be successful as possible. So don't hesitate if there's support that our team can provide to you.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. I'll wait until everyone's off now. Shut us down.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for for presenting and organizing and switching last minute.
It's all good. It's actually, sometimes it's easier to present, so I can see the presenter view, so. I took a screenshot
Yeah.
just so we know how many people attended.
Okay. Great. You could stop the recording probably too.
We got to edit it now.
Yeah.